The British government has just confirmed it intends to bring forward legislation to strip Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from the line of succession. And I am telling you now, this is the most seismic constitutional moment this country has faced since Edward VIII packed his bags and scurried off to marry Wallis Simpson. 82% of the British public want him gone. Australia has written to every realm country backing his removal. New Zealand has done the same. The dominoes are falling and falling fast. And yet, as I sit here watching all of this unfold, I find myself asking one very pointed question that nobody seems brave enough to answer properly. Why on earth are we stopping at Andrew? Now listen carefully because this matters. Trade Minister Chris Bryant stood up in Parliament this week and said, and I quote loosely, that they are working at pace and intend to bring forward legislation when they can. The Prime Minister himself told reporters the government is looking at options in relation to succession. The Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey called Andrew's potential ascension to the crown intolerable. And for once, I find myself in the rather uncomfortable position of agreeing with a Liberal Democrat. One simply cannot have a man under police investigation for misconduct in public office, a man who spent 11 hours in custody on his 66th birthday, no less, sitting 8th in line to be our head of state. It is beyond absurd. It is an insult to every decent, law-abiding citizen of this great nation. But here is where it gets properly thorny, and where I think the commentators and the politicians are being frightfully timid. What about Beatrice and Eugenie? Because if you remove Andrew, you have his elder daughter sitting at 9th in line, her 2 children after her, and then Eugenie at 12th. Constitutional law experts like Professor Robert Hazel have said it depends entirely on how the legislation is framed. The government could remove Andrew alone and leave his daughters untouched. And I understand the instinct to be kind. I do. These young women did not choose their father. They did not ask for any of this ghastliness. But I am sorry, and I mean this with every fibre of my being. Sentiment cannot override constitutional common sense. Think about it practically. If Andrew is deemed so morally unfit that Parliament must act across 15 sovereign nations to pluck him from the succession, how does it make a shred of sense to leave his daughters and their children sitting there, deriving their entire claim through the very man you have just expelled? It is like pulling a rotten apple from the barrel and leaving all the ones it touched sitting right there on the shelf. Nobody is saying Beatrice and Eugenie are rotten. Mark my words, that is not what I am saying at all. But their constitutional position flows directly from their father. When Edward VIII abdicated, the legislation removed him and his descendants. There is a clear precedent and we ought to follow it. Now, I know there are those who will say, oh, but Clarissa, that is terribly harsh on 2 young mothers who have done nothing wrong. And yes, you are right, it is rather harsh, but this is not about feelings. This is about the integrity of the crown. This is about ensuring that the line of succession to the throne of the United Kingdom and 14 other sovereign nations is beyond reproach. We are talking about the very foundation of our constitutional monarchy here, not a guest list for a village fete. And while we are at it, can we address the elephant in the room, that is Andrew still being a Councillor of State? I have been going on about this until I am blue in the face, and I shall jolly well continue doing so. This man, under active police investigation, is still legally entitled to deputise for the King. Now yes, I know that the Councillors of State Act of 2022 added Princess Anne and Prince Edward to the pool specifically so that Andrew and Harry would never realistically be called upon. But legally, constitutionally, the entitlement remains. And that is not good enough. If he is removed from the line of succession, the Councillor of State issue resolves itself automatically because eligibility is tied to one's position in the succession. So it is yet another reason to get on with it. Two birds, one stone, and the stone is long overdue for throwing. What has rattled me this week, truly rattled me, is the revelation that Andrew is apparently trying to negotiate his way out of this mess. Reports suggest he would voluntarily give up his place in the line of succession, but only in exchange for a permanent grace and favour home, his horses settled at his new property, and written guarantees that his daughters keep their royal titles. I had to put down my cup of tea when I read that, I really did. The sheer brass neck of it. He is negotiating comfort, not consequences, as one palace insider so brilliantly put it. This is not a man showing an ounce of genuine remorse or concern for the institution his family has served for 1,000 years. This is a man haggling over horse stables while the monarchy weathers its worst storm in decades. It is enough to make your blood boil. And let us talk about the quite extraordinary scene in the House of Commons this week, because it was genuinely historic. For over 150 years, Erskine May, the Bible of parliamentary procedure, has prevented members of Parliament from casting reflections upon the sovereign or other members of the royal family during debates. It is there for a very good reason. The royal family cannot answer back, so it would be frightfully unfair to let politicians take potshots at them in the chamber. But the Speaker ruled that because Andrew is no longer considered a member of the royal family, those protections no longer apply. Fill your boots, chaps, was essentially the message. And fill their boots they did. Ed Davey called him a stain on our country. Members from across the political spectrum queued up to have their say. It was unprecedented, completely and utterly without precedent. But here is the constitutional wrinkle that nobody seems to have thought through properly. If Andrew is not a member of the royal family for the purposes of parliamentary debate, then what exactly is he for the purposes of the line of succession? You cannot have it both ways. Either he is connected to the institution or he is not. And if the Speaker of the House of Commons has effectively declared him outside the royal family, then surely that adds even more urgency to the case for legislative removal. The logic is staring everyone in the face. Now, I want to say something about the process itself, because it is rather more complicated than people realise, and I think it is important we understand it. Removing someone from the line of succession requires an Act of Parliament. That much is straightforward. But because the British monarch is also head of state in 14 other Commonwealth realms, those countries all need to agree as well. The last time this sort of multinational legislative effort happened was with the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013, which made the succession gender neutral, so that elder daughters would no longer be jumped by younger brothers. That took 2 years of negotiations. 2 years. Now, Professor Robert Hazel at University College London has pointed out that precious parliamentary time spent on this is time that cannot be spent on other pressing matters. And I take that point, but I would counter that there are few things more pressing for the long-term health of this nation than ensuring the integrity of its constitutional monarchy. This is not some academic exercise. This is about who could, however theoretically, become our king. The good news, if we can call it that, is that there appears to be genuine political will behind this. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has written to Keir Starmer confirming his government would agree to any proposal to remove Andrew from the line of succession. He went further on Australian radio and said, rather bluntly, that people do not want this bloke in the line of succession to be their head of state. New Zealand's Prime Minister has said the same thing. So 2 of the largest realms are already on board. That is significant. What concerns me is the pace. The government says it will not act until the police investigation concludes. And I understand the legal argument there. Andrew's lawyers could claim that removing him from the succession prejudices any future trial, but I respectfully disagree with the government on this point. Removing someone from the line of succession is a constitutional matter, not a criminal one. It is about the moral fitness of an individual to potentially represent the crown. It is not a verdict on whether he committed a crime. The two things are separate and we should treat them as such. I also want to address this notion that some people keep trotting out that removing Andrew is merely performative because he is never going to be king anyway. He is 8th in line, they say, so what does it matter? Well, it matters because the line of succession is not just a list. It is the very architecture of our constitutional settlement. It tells the world who we are and what we stand for as a nation. Having a man under investigation for misconduct in public office sitting in that line tells the world that we are not serious about standards. And Britain has always been serious about standards. Or at least we ought to be. I think about King Charles in all of this, and my heart goes out to him. It truly does. He has done everything in his power. He stripped Andrew of his titles, his honours, his home. He packed him off to a cottage on the Sandringham estate. He has publicly stated his full and wholehearted support for the police investigation. But the line of succession is not in his gift. He cannot do it alone. He needs Parliament and he needs the other realms. And I think there is something rather dignified about a king who respects those constitutional boundaries, even when it must be agonising to watch this scandal unfold day after grinding day. But dignity has its limits, and patience has its breaking point. The crown has survived civil wars, revolutions, abdications, 2 world wars, and the loss of an empire. It will survive Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. But it will survive far better and far stronger if our elected leaders stop dithering, stop worrying about parliamentary schedules, and do what 82% of this country is asking them to do. Strip him from the succession. Strip his daughters from the succession. Remove him as Councillor of State. And let this great institution of ours, this 1,000-year-old beacon of stability and service, move forward into the future with its head held high. Because that is what Britain does. We take our lumps, we do what needs doing, and we carry on. And right now, what needs doing could not be more blindingly obvious.